Hey folks, today we're taking a look at different types of combat in tabletop role-playing games like D&D. First thing to get out of the way, this advice is not exclusive to D&D. Numerous TTRPGs follow this format. Rather than dissecting specific game mechanics, we're going to observe what kinds of combats you can throw at your players. All four of the types I'll describe in this video have their own purpose in the overall design of your campaign. The first type of combat is the most rarely used, but also the most important kind to know about, a math combat. Math combats are the sorts of fights where the numbers your party has are put on display against the numbers your opponents have, and whoever has the better numbers wins. Math combats should only be used in a handful of scenarios, such as when first instructing the game, or when you want your players to feel powerful against their opponents. And that's really it when it comes to math combats. Throw one in as your very first fight so that all your players get a feel for what combat is like and how the whole process flows. Remember that combat is played very differently from other parts of role-playing games and usually accounts for a majority of the game's rules. Players' brains will need to adjust to the game that they're playing, and math combats make for a good way for your players to get used to that. But once they're on board, throw a different kind of combat their way. For example, you may want your very first combat for your party to be against a small group smaller in number than your party. In addition, these enemies may pack less punch than each member of your starting adventurer team. The whole purpose of a fight like this is to allow new players or players who are new to the system to get comfortable with the flow of combat. It's also worth mentioning that they should always win this first fight. You may also be interested in using math combats to show your players how far they've come by showing how much stronger they've gotten. Throwing a horde of weak enemies that you know your party can manage at a high level can provide both combat and narrative benefits. The party could befriend, antagonize, or neutrally interact with these enemies, since the party possesses control over the scenario where they're confronted by this horde. Math combats are not very interesting, and there shouldn't be too many of them in a campaign. The second type of combat is a tactics combat. This is where your players showcase their characters using skills to the best of their abilities while overcoming their weaknesses. In my opinion, this should be the most common type of combat. Tactics combats are where players get to make use of all the really cool abilities that they have on their character sheets. As the game master, you should design your tactics combat such that some party members are able to showcase their strengths, while other members of the party display their weaknesses. Remember, you're telling a collaborative story. Frequently bringing up your player character's strengths and weaknesses allow for exceptional role-playing moments. When I see the player characters arguing with each other, knowing that the players themselves are comfortable, then I know I've done a great job of setting up a story beat. If the game is all about your player characters, get the characters talking to each other about things they've kept secret and other conflicts that will help drive the story forward. Of critical importance is that you're fair in displaying the strengths and weaknesses of your party's characters. If you have an archer character and a water mage, it's unfair to make every foe a flying enemy and none of them fire enemies. The archer is very clearly showcasing his strengths repeatedly, while the water mage never gets to do so. Sometimes the strengths and weaknesses are clear, but sometimes they're tougher to find. But adding variability to all the strengths and weaknesses is what will make the players feel smart, and will steer the party towards a mindset focused on teamwork. Once the characters realize they have a weakness, it will naturally be up to the rest of the cast of characters to protect them from that weakness. Aside from strengths and weaknesses specifically, tactics battles are also where the players can best utilize their knowledge of the combat system you're using. Players who optimize their characters and wish to fight efficiently will often appreciate a variety of tactics battles. But beyond that, it's just respectful to your players to make use of the rules on their character sheet, considering the vast amount of work players generally have to put into making their character sheets. Then we have the third type of combat, which is a gimmick combat. A gimmick combat is some type of combat where there's some meaningful twist that changes the way the fight tends to work. These can include location-based gimmicks, such as the combat taking place underwater or on a jagged rocky mountainside, or mechanics-based gimmicks, such as the enemies healing to full at the beginning of every round, or the enemy gaining more actions every new round of combat. Gimmick combats are usually tactics combats with a twist. And depending on the twist, the way the players approach the combat may be entirely different from usual. Gimmick combats are generally the sorts of designs that game masters really enjoy crafting, so I won't go into great detail about what kinds of gimmicks you can use. But I will say this: don't let the rules of the game stand in the way of designing your gimmick combat. Player characters' gameplay and the enemy's gameplay are generally asymmetric, and it's okay to bend a rule here or there to make a cool idea work. With your player's permission, that is. I usually alternate between tactics combats and gimmick combats for a majority of the game. You can think of a tactics combat as a fastball and a gimmick combat as a changeup. Tactics combats are straightforward, but they can be challenging to overcome. Change-ups are just that, a change-up from the usual way the game is played, and you may be faced with a challenge unlike one you've seen before. Finally, I'd like to talk about the fourth type of combat, and that is puzzle combats. You can think of puzzle combats as a more extreme version of a gimmick fight. Usually the goal of a gimmick fight is different from the goal of most other fights. If you're playing D&D, where traditionally you want to defeat your opponents, a puzzle fight may have the goal of shoving your opponent out of a ring, waiting for them to tap out, or reaching a specific location before the specific time runs out. Puzzle combats make a great type of combat to introduce when your players have a wide variety of utility spells, or when their characters have enough charisma to talk their way out of danger. In fact, all 4 of these combat types I've mentioned in this video can be ordered from least to most complex in the order I mentioned them. For example, math fights don't have a lot of thinking to them. You just use the abilities you have and you're likely to win. Tactics combats introduce player and player character thinking, which allows for a more interesting fight. Gimmick combats, while running the risk of alienating the players who like playing by the rules, offers a different sort of experience that requires thinking outside of your character sheet. And finally, puzzle combats change even the goal of the combat, making it so far removed from a usual combat that it helps to showcase non-combat utility abilities. I feel that math combat should be used maybe once for the very first fight with a group of new players, and maybe once again throughout the rest of the campaign. Then I would alternate between tactics and gimmick combats at an unpredictable rate, and maybe introduce a puzzle combat once in a while. What do you think of these types of combat? Do you have any other combat type suggestions? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.